Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I am Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in Brussels, William Denslow. William, good to have you with us.
Hi Tanvi, it's 1:30 p.m. here in Brussels and across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes. Thousands of people in Papua New Guinea are missing following a landslide. And dozens of people have been reportedly killed in Rafah in an Israeli airstrike. Comes after the International Court of Justice ordered a halt to Israel's military operation in the southern Gaza city. But first, the headlines.
China, South Korea and Japan reaffirmed denuclearization of North Korea in their first trilateral summit since 2019. China's premier hails new beginning. Foreign ministers of the 27 European Union member states meet in Brussels to discuss the ongoing crises in Ukraine and Gaza. 21st century is tech-driven and India is leading the fintech age, says India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in an interview given to news agency IANS. And strong winds and heavy rains lash eastern India as Cyclone Remal weakens into a cyclonic storm after making landfall on Sunday. Tornadoes and storms leave 22 dead across central United States. China, Japan and South Korea have reaffirmed denuclearization of North Korea and the stability of the Korean peninsula after the Trilateral summit in Seoul. The top leaders of the three countries held a rare meeting with efforts to revitalize the three-party free trade agreement negotiations which have been stalled since 2019.
We will deepen economic and trade connectivity, strengthen cooperation in regional industrial and supply chains, and promote the resumption of negotiations on the China-Japan-South Korea Free Trade Agreement.
Now, North Korea is condemning comments made by China, South Korea and Japan on denuclearizing the country at a summit on Monday. Pyongyang called the comments as a grave provocation. DD India's Chris Gilbert reports from Tokyo.
Experts had held low expectations for these talks, with diplomatic sources saying ahead of them that getting any two of these countries to agree on bilateral issues is a challenge, but getting three of them as a group is much more difficult. But there have been outcomes from this first trilateral China, South Korea, Japan summit in 4 years. The three of them agreeing on the importance of North Korean denuclearization. Now, this agreement came just hours after North Korea announced or provided notice to Japan and South Korea that it intends to launch another satellite into orbit, or attempt to do so, sometime before June 4th as the window is provided. This was met with condemnation, with the US, South Korea and Japan demanding that North Korea cancel this plan, believing that it is an excuse or a reason for North Korea to continue to practice and improve its ballistic technology. Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan, said at the Trilateral summit that political stability on the Korean Peninsula is in the interest of all three countries, China, South Korea and Japan. And Li Qiang, the Premier of China, was a little bit more hands-off and called for political settlement through dialogue. There was also some progress on the issue of economics as well, with all three countries agreeing to resume talks to try and pave the way towards one day achieving a free trade agreement, a three-way free trade agreement. Now, trade is incredibly important to the relationship, the bilateral and trilateral relationships of these countries. Chris Gilbert in Tokyo reporting for DD India.
Meanwhile, North Korea is planning to launch a rocket carrying a satellite towards the Yellow Sea and east of Luzon Island between May 27th and June 4th. South Korea and Japan called on North Korea not to carry out a planned rocket launch carrying a space satellite using ballistic missile technology.
We affirmed that the denuclearization of the North Korea and the stability of the Korean Peninsula are in the common interest of our three nations. I also requested that the two leaders continue to provide assistance for the immediate resolution of the abduction issue, and they expressed their understanding.
South Korean military also conducted attack drills, deploying about 20 aircraft, and said it is fully prepared for North Korea's possible provocations.
The so-called satellite launch that North Korea announced today is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions, and the international community should respond firmly.
On to Europe now. Foreign ministers of 27 European Union member states are meeting in Brussels today to discuss the ongoing crises in Ukraine and Gaza. My colleague William Denslow is in Brussels. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. William, Israel's Rafah mission set to dominate talks?
Well, Tavi, that's absolutely right. The European Union foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss the tense situation in the Middle East and the conflict in Gaza. EU foreign ministers are also expected to hold talks with their counterparts from Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the UAE and Qatar. Additionally, the foreign ministers are also set to discuss the EU support to Ukraine in its conflict against Russia, including the use of frozen Russian military assets to buy military aid for Ukraine. And in the latest from the Israel-Hamas conflict, Israel says its military carried out strikes on a Hamas compound in Rafah and took out 2 of the group's commanders. Israel said the strike was carried out against legitimate targets under international law. Israel said that it was aware of reports indicating that the strike caused a fire and civilians in the area were harmed, adding that the incident is under review. Qatar termed this attack as a hindrance on reaching a ceasefire and hostage exchange deal.
The details of yesterday's incident are still under an investigation, which we are committed to conducting to the fullest extent. The IDF regrets any harm to non-combatants during the war.
And for more on this, DD India's Sarah Coates joins us live from Tel Aviv. Sarah, good to see you. Sarah, what's been the reaction to this strike in Israel?
Hello there, Will. The reaction here really underscoring the seriousness of this incident, with Israel's military prosecutor determining it as very grave. Now, I'll bring you a little bit more of that statement that we did get from the IDF a little earlier. It says that an IDF aircraft struck a Hamas compound in which significant terrorists were operating, saying that the strike was carried out against legitimate targets under international law through the use of precise munitions and on the basis of precise intelligence. Now, according to the military, it eliminated a Hamas chief of staff of the West Bank, also another official from that same area. As you did mention, the military is acknowledging that a number of civilians were harmed, saying it is investigating. But as we go to air, we've been hearing from doctors on the ground who say that they expect the death toll from this strike to rise, given that they say it was on an area that was previously declared a safe zone by the Israeli military. Will.
And Sarah, this comes just days after the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to halt its offensive in Rafah. EU officials a little earlier are calling on Israel to respect that order from the ICJ. How will that influence Israel's actions on the ground?
Well, Israel has maintained it is operating in accordance with international law. Shortly after that ruling a couple of days ago, we heard furious reactions from Israeli officials. They called it anti-Semitic. They were saying that they will continue fighting until all of these Israeli hostages are released. We do need to remember that this also did include Hamas, and we did hear from the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, just a little earlier, saying that Hamas must also respect this ruling. And we do need to remember it was only 24 hours ago that Hamas fired a barrage of rockets over central Israel, including here in Tel Aviv. It was the first time in 4 months that air raid sirens were activated in this area. We can tell you that the Iron Dome missile defence system, it did intercept a number of these incoming projectiles, but not all of them, with one of them actually hitting a home just a little north of where I am, wounding one person. Will.
We'll have to leave it there. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. That was our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Sarah Coates. And moving on, in the latest from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia claims to have gained control of 2 villages in Ukraine on Monday. The 2 settlements are in the Kharkiv and Donetsk region. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that forces secured advantageous positions in various directions and successfully targeted Ukrainian armoured vehicles and artillery systems. Whereas the Ukrainian army claims its drones have targeted a Russian radar near the city of Orsk. No civilian infrastructure has been reportedly hit in the attack. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is visiting Spain and was welcomed by King Philippe on Monday. Zelensky is set to hold a joint press conference with Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. The 2 countries are expected to sign an agreement for Ukraine's security assistance. French President Emmanuel Macron is in Germany for a 3-day visit, followed by a bilateral meeting as the European Union's 2 biggest powers seek to show unity ahead of next month's EU parliamentary election. Macron's trip is the first by a French president in 24 years. Along with the German president, Macron laid out a wreath at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. Emmanuel Macron warned against a slackening of support for Ukraine in its defence against Russia.
Être du côté de la paix aujourd'hui, c'est donner.
To be on the side of peace today means giving strength to the law peace, but not capitulation. Peace is not an abandonment of principles. We have too often seen this confusion in collective debates. Peace means enabling a country to defend its borders and sovereignty. International law to build a lasting peace is the camp we have chosen, that of the law for the long term.
Severe storms and tornadoes have swept through various states in the United States over the weekend, claiming 22 lives, injuring people and leaving widespread destruction in their wake. At least 15 people were killed, with over 100 injured in northern Arkansas after tornadoes hit the state late Saturday. Another powerful tornado struck the north-central part of Texas on Saturday, claiming 7 lives, including 2 children, and injuring at least 100 people.
There are, in the midst of total devastation, the bright points are all of the people coming together and taking care of one another and looking out for their neighbors and their community and doing whatever it takes to help get people taken care of. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Rescue efforts continue and locals are mourning losses, as over 2,000 people are feared to be buried under a massive landslide that swept over a remote village in Papua New Guinea. Residents are still trying to reach out to survivors as heavy equipment is unavailable to reach remote areas for rescue. The International Organization for Migration's chief of mission in Papua New Guinea said treacherous terrain and the difficulty of getting aid to the affected sites raises possibilities of few survivors being found.
It's very difficult to recover the bodies from underneath the heavy debris. And the land is still sliding. rocks are continuing to fall. And furthermore, to make things worse, there is water flowing underneath the debris and the floor, soil, ground on which the debris sits. So we fear that this mud can turn the ground into a slide.
And Tanvi, the UN agency claims the death toll currently stands at nearly 700. But with more than 2,000 people buried alive and rescue efforts being hindered, the death toll could go up exponentially.
Right, William. And India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has said that he's deeply saddened by the loss of lives in Papua New Guinea following that landslide. In a social media post, Dr. S. Jaishankar said that India stands in solidarity with our friends at this difficult time, adding that our thoughts are with the government and the people. Thank you, William. William Denslow joining us all from Brussels. And severe cyclonic storm Remal, which made landfall between the coasts of India and Bangladesh on Sunday, has now weakened into a cyclonic storm. It is predicted that to weaken further into a deep depression through the day. Several districts of Assam and the northeast are on high alert. Kolkata, the capital of the eastern Indian state of West Bengal, is witnessing heavy rain and gusty winds after the cyclone made the landfall. More than 110,000 people from coastal regions, including the Sundarbans and Sagar Island, have been evacuated. India's national and state disaster response forces are clearing the roads after trees were uprooted following the landfall. You're with us on DD India Global, still to come on the show. India to display its indigenous portable hospital for emergencies at the 77th session of the World Health Assembly in Geneva.
Hype versus facts. In-depth news and analysis with experts who will help you decide why this election matters. DD India is the main election headquarters with numbers most accurate, data most reliable, and viewership across the platforms. Stay tuned to the Great Indian Election only on weekdays at 8:30 p.m. IST and 1500 hours GMT.
You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Next news from India now. In an interview given to a prominent news agency, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi discussed several topics concerning the current political scenario in the country, the governance and more. The Indian Prime Minister said 21st century is tech-driven and India is leading this fintech age. Prime Minister Narendra Modi opened up for the first time on Congress leader Rahul Gandhi and Aam Aadmi Party leader Arvind Kejriwal receiving endorsements from Pakistan. The Prime Minister said that he is now aware why certain people are liked by those who harbour animosity towards us. He added that why does support emerge from there, meaning Pakistan, for a few individuals? He said this is just a matter that requires a thorough investigation.
चुनाव भारत का है और भारत का लोकतंत्र बहुत ही मैच्योर्ड है, तंदुरुस्त परंपराएं हैं और भारत के मतदाता भी बाहर की किसी भी हरकतों से प्रभावित होने वाले मतदाता नहीं है। मैं नहीं जानता हूं कि कुछ ही लोग हैं जिनको हमारे साथ दुश्मनी रखने वाले लोग क्यों पसंद करते हैं, कुछ ही लोग हैं जिनके समर्थन में आवाज़ वहाँ से क्यों उठती है। अब ये बहुत बड़ी जांच पड़ताल का या गंभीर विषय है और मुझे नहीं लगता है कि मुझे जिस पद पर मैं बैठा हूँ वहाँ से ऐसे विषयों पर कोई कमेंट करनी चाहिए।
The Indian Prime Minister further in the interview said that government is following a policy of zero tolerance towards corruption and agencies are working in a very independent manner in this regard. He took a dig at the so-called Khan Market gang for creating a narrative to protect certain people who are corrupt.
हम बद इरादे से कुछ नहीं करेंगे, जो भी होगा हमारी सूचना यही है, जीरो टॉलरेंस। दूसरा, तथ्यों के आधार पर ही एक्शन होना चाहिए, परसेप्शन के आधार पर नहीं होना चाहिए। तथ्य जुटाने में मेहनत करनी पड़ती है। अब अफसरों ने मेहनत भी की, अब मगरमच्छ पकड़े जाने लगे हैं, तो हमें सवाल पूछा जा रहा है कि मगरमच्छों को क्यों पकड़ते हो। ये समझ में नहीं आता है कि कौन सा गैंग है, खान मार्केट गैंग, जो कुछ लोगों को बचाने के लिए इस प्रकार के नैरेटिव घड़ती है। पहले आप ही कहते थे छोटों को पकड़ते हो, बड़े छूट जाते हैं। जब सिस्टम ईमानदारी से काम करने लगी, बड़े लोग पकड़े जाने लगे, तो अब आप चिल्लाने लगे हो।
India's Commerce Ministry's Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade DPIIT Secretary Rajesh Kumar Singh said that the new World Intellectual Property Organization WIPO treaty is a big step forward for India and the Global South, as it will help in protecting traditional knowledge of these countries. DD India's Ajay Mishra has more.
On the face of it, why the world need such a kind of treaty from the Indian point of view, sir?
For a long time, countries of the developed South, including India, have been asking WIPO to create at least minimum disclosure requirements when it comes to people making patent applications based on this type of indigenous genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. You will recall that in the case of Haldi or in the case of Texmati, we had to take steps to get the patent annulled after the attempts had almost succeeded. This new instrument will ensure that we will have the ability to enforce mandatory disclosure requirements on patent applicants in almost 150 countries who've signed up to this. So it's a big step forward for the Global South and for India, which is, as you said, a very rich source of both genetic resources and traditional knowledge.
But sir, why did it take so long to convince the Western world on the preservation of these kind of traditional knowledge, and how did you and your team really succeeded in convincing them?
Obviously, for a long time, developed nations, Western nations in particular, put more of a premium on what they call innovation rather than on and did not give much credence to our claims about traditional knowledge, about traditional practices and genetic resources. I think over time, it took a long time. It took almost 20 years. It was in 2019 that Colombia first raised this issue. And thereafter, it's been, as I said, almost 20 years plus to convince various countries, particularly those of the developed world, that besides putting a premium on innovation, you should also give adequate credit and ensure benefit sharing to rich traditional communities who've provided traditional knowledge and genetic resources, which are sometimes thought to be surreptitiously appropriated by certain parties for commercial benefits.
It's really historic for India in terms of protecting the genetic resources and traditional knowledge. With camera person Radhakrishna Tiwari, Ajay Mishra, DD India, New Delhi.
Now, the 77th session of the World Health Assembly begins in Geneva, Switzerland on Monday, and it brings together global health officials, including officials from India. India will showcase its success stories in the healthcare sector. India will display its Arogya Maitri Disaster Management Cube, an indigenous portable hospital for emergencies. At this summit, India and Japan held bilateral meet on the sidelines of the of the 77th World Health Assembly in Geneva, both sides agreed to expand the areas of collaboration to digital health, use of artificial intelligence in health, elderly care and non-communicable diseases. Both countries agreed to work on a memorandum of cooperation signed in 2018 and hold a joint working group on it soon. They also agreed to strengthen the ongoing program on training of nursing professionals in Japanese language for opportunities in Japan. And next we take a look at other stories making news around the world. An Ireland-bound Qatar Airways flight Boeing 787 Dreamliner hit turbulence on its way, but the flight is reported to have landed safely later. 12 people sustained minor injuries and were given immediate medical attention. The incident occurred for 20 seconds. Egypt's first eco-friendly electric taxi started its services in new administrative capital near Cairo. Initiated by the Ministry of Transport and owned by its affiliated company, the project has launched 10 such taxis with plans to roll out a total of 145 electric taxis in subsequent phases. And one of the 3 largest mime festivals of the world kicked off in South Korea on Sunday. The week-long Chuncheon International Mime Festival started with water performance Surajang. Drenched in water, residents enjoyed the festivities along with their loved ones. The event will come to a close with a grand blowout of fire. So with that, it's a wrap in this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on our different social media handles at DD India Live. And of course, for those on the go, you can download our DD India mobile app. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.